You all know me. I'm Andrea Sampson. I'm the CEO and founder of Talk Boutique, and I'm the head coach here at the Thought Leader Academy. And today we are doing our first guest expert session. And I'm incredibly pleased to be introducing you all to my friend and my colleague, Laura Beauparlant. Laura is the CEO and founder of Lab Creative. She's also the author of Brand Chemistry. Laura is an absolute expert when it comes to understanding how to take the chemistry of who we are and apply that to the brands that we create. Now, those brands might be personal brands, they might be professional brands, or they might be a little bit of both. And I've worked with Laura now for many years. We've done many, many different things together. And I've had the privilege of seeing her magic at work. So I would like to introduce you all to Laura. Hello, Laura. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. What a lovely introduction. Thanks, Andrea. Nice to meet you, Melissa and Shivani.
Okay, well, we'll get started. Like I said, people may join as we go along. If not, feel free to jump in at any point if you guys have questions. So what we're going to do today is a little bit of a Q&A with Laura and myself, looking at this topic of the importance of your message as a thought leader in your branding. And I think for any of you who have worked with us, and Melissa, I know you just finished a program with us, and Shivani, I think you're working through some of our stuff right now. When we talk to aspiring thought leaders, the first thing we do is we start talking about your message. What is your message? What's the core idea that you're putting out into the world? And that's important because as thought leaders, it is really important that we know and that we ground in a message. Because that is what we're bringing to our audience. But the question is, well, how does that message have anything to do with the brand that you're creating? Because once you've got a message, now you need to, as a thought leader, be known out there in the world just beyond who you are and what you're doing. And so that becomes your personal brand. So I thought it would be interesting to talk to Laura about how she takes some of that idea, that message that we've come up with through the work that we do together, and then applies that to your personal brand. So Laura, I'll start there and go, as a branding expert, as somebody who really understands deeply what it takes to brand, how important is that core thought leadership message and how do you use it?
Yeah, it's absolutely essential. Like everything that we do really has to focus on understanding what is the foundation of this brand? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? Why do you do what you do? What is the personality so that we can create, that messaging and that visual brand that aligns with you? And so without that, I like to use the analogy that you can't build a house without a foundation. And that core messaging is the foundation. Because without that, it crumbles. You lose direction. You start to go after all of those shiny objects because you don't have that guiding light that's showing you this is the direction. And I need to stay this. If I want to go where I want to go, I need to ignore those shiny objects. I need to keep on track. So to me, that core messaging helps you focus on staying, true to what it is that you really want to do. It helps attract the right clients. It could also attract the right employees or team members if you're growing your team. I've seen that happen as well. So it's so important to start there because what I've seen is when you have that core message, everything comes from that. It's almost like spokes from a wheel, right? You start with that core message, then you can create the visual brand, then you can create the podcast or the blog post or the social media presence, get on stages, write the book. All of these things have to come from that central idea. Otherwise, you're just kind of like throwing things around and it looks and feels disjointed. And then people get confused about who you are, what you do, because they're getting these mixed messages and signals because you don't have that constant in your messaging.
Yeah, exactly. And, as you're talking, I'm just thinking it's exactly the same way we describe it, right? Because as we are developing out that core message, it becomes, we often refer to it as the North Star. Like whether you're doing a talk or a podcast or writing an article, even, that core thought leadership message is the touchstone that you come back to always and say, am I on message? Where am I in the message? Because sometimes we get lost, we're like,
Yeah.
oh gosh, where was I? And that core thought leadership message, that statement of purpose, as we call it, is what you come back to, and it reorients you. So I think it sounds like the brand is doing a lot of the same things. It's like it's going to that core message. It's pulling out some of those underpinnings and allowing an audience to start to see what you stand for. And, I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting piece. I often say the brand, when we're aligning a brand to our core message, it has to start with our values. There has to be a values alignment. So how does a person's core values or a company's core values play into a brand?
Yeah, well, one of the first things that we do is really get clear on who the audience is, like who's the target audience, whether it's a personal brand or a business. And a lot of people say, well, I don't know what my clients value. And I say, start with you. Like, if you know what your values are, if you understand personally or as a company what your values are, you want to attract the same clients. You want to attract people that have a shared value set to you. So when you're clear on what you value, it means that you'll take on clients that also value those, or you'll actually turn away. I recently had an experience where somebody said they had a client, honesty is like a really strong value. And they had a client that was lying to them, and they fired the client. And they're
Right.
like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And they were trying to kind of backpedal. And they're like, no, this is a value that we are true to. And, you're lying to my staff, you're making, and so it was so interesting to hear it from the flip side that they actually ended up firing the client because it didn't align with their values. And so I think but if you don't have that clarity on your own values, how can you know who it is that you want to attract? And so it's really looking at the characteristics of those people, and making sure that, if you have a team, everybody understands what those values are, not hiding them, not keeping them in, a file in Dropbox somewhere in a corner that nobody's ever going to look at. And so it's making sure that everybody who touches the brand understands what the brand is all about.
I think it's interesting too. I'm sort of playing with this idea of, okay, the core thought leadership idea. It often gets built out of a lot of discussion. And, is it something where as communications coaches, as we're working with our clients, should we be looking at their values as we're building those? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's important because that can drive everything else, right? If you understand what they're trying to do and how they want to show up in the world, to me, that helps from a messaging perspective, because you're going to be, the way you word things or the way you talk about something, you want to ensure that aligns with those values. So I think it can help from a language perspective. It really helps me to understand. So something we do, we look at brand personality. So it's sometimes people are like, what's the difference? So values are more of a internal kind of, what you stand for. The personality can intertwine with that, but it's more about how you then show up, how you show those values. So if somebody were to describe your brand like a friend, what are the adjectives they would use? And so that helps from a language and communications perspective as well. So it's kind of like the values plus the personality really help get the clarity from a communication perspective.
So I think what's interesting about what you just said, and I want to bring it back, is that the values are internal, they're intrinsic to who I am. They, me as the brand, or Talk Boutique, or the Thought Leader Academy as the brand, has intrinsic values that that we put out there almost through our actions, through the way we show up, through the decisions we make, our values almost become a filter by which we look at the world. But
Hmm.
the way in which others experience us is our personality. That's the external view almost of the values. So my personality is colored by my values. And so how I show up is displaying the values I hold. And so these two things are really intertwined. And so then I would think as the message itself, so it's like, so if the values are the internal and the personality is the external, and now the message has to use both of those things in order to really be congruent with that brand, right? With the person
Yep.
brand. It's really powerful when you're able to
Absolutely.
create that alignment. Now,
Yeah.
we talk a lot, about thought leaders, and thought leaders are, sometimes they're aspiring thought leaders because not all of us are there yet. We're still working on it. But even if we're still working on it, sometimes we're entrepreneurs and we're out in the world and we're trying to have our message heard and our brand seen. Other times we're living inside of organizations, and we might want to stay inside of an organization because there's nothing, you can still be a thought leader, of course, inside of an organization. But how does that affect, like, do you have a brand if you're inside of an organization?
Everybody has a brand. I think that's a common misconception. Like, even if you think you don't have a brand, that is still your brand. So your online presence as it is today is a reflection of your personal brand, whether you're in an organization or you're an entrepreneur. So I think a lot of people just think that, well, I just work in an organization and that's that. But everything you put out there in the world or don't put out is a reflection on that. So, I've had people come to me and say, I want to move up in the company, but I keep getting passed over. They're not seeing me as the person who could take on that role. Well, then that's a personal branding problem. They may have the skills and the chops for it. So we had to work on figuring out what is their brand all about? What do they stand for? How can they now show up in their job, on social media, that still aligns with the company that they're in, but that reflects who they are and their values and what they bring to the table, which gets a few more eyeballs on them. Maybe the C-suite is going to notice them more, or they're going to be seen as somebody they can now bring up. Or, maybe you move to another company and you move up, or you launch into entrepreneurship. It's much harder to do any of these things if you're not paying attention to what your personal brand is telling people.
I think that's powerful. There's so many questions going through my mind. And I was just thinking, you and I have been having a great conversation. We've got a few people here. Does anyone have any questions around this? Because I think this is a really hot one. And I'd love to, before I jump into my questions, I'd love to hear if there's anyone, we've got Gina, Melissa, Shivani. Do you guys have any questions? And feel free to just, jump in. Yeah, Melissa.
Melissa.
Yeah, so I find this conversation very interesting, particularly when it veers into social media. Like for myself, for instance, I am very lazy on social media. I'm a very private person. I understand from a business perspective and a thought leadership perspective, one does need to nurture that presence, and it feels I find it hard to sort of wrap my head around how to not make it performative and to be authentic in that, given that I'm more introverted and more of a private person. I'm someone who thinks, well, your work speaks for itself. But I know that is mission critical to this area. So I don't know, would love some thoughts about how to, just
Yeah.
sort of
Let
turn
me
the page on that.
let me see if I've got the question right, and then I'll let Laura jump in. So the question I think you're asking is, as a professional and as somebody who's sort of in that thought leadership space, but yet introverted and private, how do you manage a brand in a public space like social media such
Yeah.
that doesn't violate the core values that you have. Because I think what I just heard you say is you had some core values around privacy. And so, is that sort of framing it properly?
Yeah, I think privacy and being authentic, right? Because it doesn't, I realize that I often don't feel authentic in that space when I'm, when people, I don't know, it's just my sort of perception of a lot of social media. It is incredibly performative and, but it serves a very critical purpose. So yeah, how does one
Yeah.
make that transition?
It's a great question. So before we go, are you in an organization or do you have your own business, Melissa?
I'm in an organization. Yes.
Okay.
So I'm in an organization. I am not using that platform though to speak for the organization or for the work we do.
Okay. So I totally hear what you're saying. And actually, and Andre and I work together on this, but I have a talk that I give that's around branding through storytelling and how to curate your vulnerability. And it's all about, sharing more about you while maintaining a private life. So I really believe in this. And I believe so many people are vomiting their personal life all over the internet, and it is too much. Or they're hiding, right? They're either hiding behind that veil of professionalism because, as you said, you think the work should speak for yourself, or you're like, I'm an introvert. I don't want to put myself out there. There's a lot of different reasons why they're afraid of judgment, all of those things. But then you have the people that are doing it in a very performative way, and in a kind of gross and icky way. So I see both sides, but I think there's a beautiful middle ground. And that is this curating your stories and looking at your life and going, what stories could be relevant to the work that I do? What stories, because storytelling is such an important part of letting people in, but it doesn't mean you have to tell them all the things. So I like to look at the stories that you share from a position of, why am I telling this story? Like if it's for sympathy or for, just to get your rage out, whatever the reason that you have this, reasoning, then that's not the time, right? That's the time to go internal, to seek counsel, to get that support. But if you can look at this story and go, wow, this could really help other people. I learned something from this experience that will help humanize my brand, will help people see me in a different light. Then that's a story to tell. Then it's, is now the time. If you're still in the midst of some kind of a crisis, probably not the right time to tell it. But when you're on the other side of it and you can look back and go, okay, I always say you want to teach from your scars, not from your wounds. So if you have something that's a gaping wound, that's not the time to go on social media and share it. But if you're like, this is healed and it doesn't mean it ended well, right? Something could have gone terribly wrong. But you can tell that story from a place of healing and teaching as opposed to commiserating and trauma. And then, is this my story to tell? Right? Is this story going to hurt somebody that I care about? Is this something I want out on social media? Right? So there may be things from a family perspective that you're like, no, that's private, and I don't want to share that. But I've seen the importance of putting in those human moments of your personal story into your thought leadership and how impactful that can be, because that's what people remember. I wrote a blog post about going for a flight with my dad in his single engine airplane and the view that I had flying next to Manhattan at 1,000 feet and the view that gave me of the city. And I'm so used to Manhattan from in the streets, looking up at the buildings with the sounds and the smells and the horns honking and all of that and the people. But here I had this 1,000-foot view of Manhattan. I'd never seen it like that before. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's the perspective I give my clients. They're in the buildings looking up. They can't see what I see, which is the big picture. And so I wrote that story about what I do through the lens of this flight down the Hudson River with my dad. And that was a number of years ago. And I still have people mention that blog post from probably, I think, 2017.
I'm just going to jump in there because, first of all, I just want to highlight what Laura just did, which was so beautiful. Laura just helped us to understand what she did by telling a story and ending it on honestly a core idea, right? What she does for her clients. And what I think, not only was it a well-told story in a moment, right? She didn't take very long, but she used all the elements of story. She used sights and sound and brought us into the emotions of that story, and then was able to align it to her core thought leadership around branding and the way in which she helps her clients. What is beautiful about that, and why I wanted to stop and really highlight it, is that this is actually how we should be using social media. It is, as Laura said, an opportunity for us as thought leaders or aspiring thought leaders to get our message out there, but it's on message. It's not just stories, it's stories with a purpose. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. If you follow me, you'll know that I have a huge following on LinkedIn, and I post twice a day, every day, and I write every one of those posts. And you'll see that every one of those posts, sometimes they're vulnerable, sometimes they're more inspirational, but they always come back to one thing, which is we all need to use our voice as thought leaders because the world needs us. That's my core thought leadership, is the world needs more diverse thought leaders. And so we each need to learn how to use our voice so that we can influence the future. And create one that we want. And so for me, as I think about using social media, and much like you, Melissa, I'm pretty private in terms of my life. I don't tell people a lot about my own life, but I do use stories from time to time, as Laura just did, to bring them into these moments, because what that does is it allows us to set up a message that's important for everyone. Is that answering your question? Is it helpful?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly helpful. It seems like in using both of your examples, incredibly strategic too, in terms of how you've taken the channel and really focused on how does this story support what I have to offer and what I believe in. So yeah, no, that's a helpful sort of filter for like, is this something that is worth sharing, I guess.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to it as well is, when you look at social media specifically, is looking at the different platforms and deciding where you want to spend your time, because you can spend all day every day just being on these platforms. I mean, and none of us have that kind of time or energy, quite frankly. And so it's deciding where you want to spend your time and how much time you want to spend. Like I said, for me, LinkedIn is my primary. I'll probably expand out to a few others, but I am personally on many of the other platforms, but LinkedIn is my business profile.
Right.
My personal brand, though, yes, we have a Talk Boutique page, but my personal brand is where I lead with. And so I'll probably at some point incorporate one or two of the other channels into my personal brand, but not more than, because ultimately it becomes too much, and I don't think it's helpful to your brand. And Laura, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on sort of all the channels, but really I've found that LinkedIn is probably the most important to me. From a design perspective, Instagram is a great platform, to share that. But I've found that it's focusing on one thing. So I'm focused on blogging. And so I'm putting my thought leadership into my blog and then creating social media posts from that. So I can write one blog post and turn that into video content, quotes, multiple pieces of content. I can share the blog post on its own. So there's lots of different ways. And what's interesting is I was just looking at some of my statistics on my blogs, and it's the ones where I'm sharing a very strong opinion on something that are the most viewed blog posts. And some of them are actually, like, one of my blog posts is the number 4 most viewed on my site. And in the top 10 was a blog post I wrote in 2019. And that's in the top 20 most viewed pages on my website overall. So these things can have longevity too. And so if I start with the blog and then I can create from there and share on whichever platform is the right one.
So I'm going to come back to the concept of sort of branding when you're inside of an organization, because we had touched on that and we sort of moved off to social media, which I actually want to bring in as well. And so, looking at the way in which people inside of organizations can brand themselves, knowing that their social media sometimes can be perceived as, representing the company that they work for. And I think it's important that you make that separation that says, this is my personal opinions. And you can do that in lots of different ways. But coming back to the brand itself and what you were just saying in terms of creating consistency. So if I'm living inside of an organization and I'm branding myself, and maybe I am writing opinion pieces and maybe I am posting, how do I manage the internal view of that such that it is seen as additive to the organization versus detracting from the organization?
Well, and I think that if the company you work for has a strong brand and a strong foundation, and you are crystal clear on what that brand lives and breathes for, what its values are, how that brand shows up, then it should, in theory, be easy to actually show up as yourself, share your opinions, knowing that maybe if you have a differing opinion from your company, that you may have, to think twice before you share that publicly. Because you also, like, how many times have we heard of somebody getting fired because of something that they were recorded saying on social media? I've heard a number of cases of that happening. So that, again, is a personal brand thing. You said something that got caught on camera and you're off hours, but you are still a part of that company. That impacts the company and that impacts you. So I think when you're in the company, you have to maybe think twice before posting something that has a different opinion from the company versus if it's yours or you're building something outside of an organization. You can take a bit of a different slant, I would say, or maybe worry less, obviously, about losing your job.
You just tweaked a question, and before I go to it though, I want to come back to that because I think one of the things that I just heard, which I think is powerful, like we started this off by talking about personal values, and that those personal values are really the brand, your personal brand, and we know that large brands have values as well. And so it sounds like, if you are in that place of differing in opinions from that of your employer, of the brand that you are living inside of, I wonder, like, would you say that that's probably like a brand's clash? I mean, because again, I think we're starting to touch on some things where it's like, look, you have a brand, they have a brand, and there's got to be an alignment in there somehow.
100%. And that is why, having a strong brand as a business helps you, and I mentioned this earlier, helps you attract the right people to work with you. And I think that is so key because, we hear about things like the Great Resignation, and you hear about people, having trouble keeping employees, or they leave, and the cost of retraining somebody new. And if you just invest in having that really powerful brand, then your people are naturally going to be, the right people will be attracted because they will share the values of your company, which means when they're off hours, they will do a great job of representing the business, even when they're not talking about the business, or if they are. But if you don't really have the values, or you still hire somebody, even though you're like, oh, they don't really fit with this company, or you lie to get in that role, there's always going to be a clash, and that they'll never really fit. And then they shouldn't. Like, that is actually, to me, a very clear indicator. I had a client who did a rebranding with me, and one of the people that worked for her already, she was already saying to me, I'm not sure if she's the right person. And as soon as we did the rebrand, this person was like, nah, I don't really understand why you bothered. And it was something like that, like a very kind of meh, whatever attitude. And that just solidified for her that this was in fact not the right person for her team, because she wasn't like, oh yes, I want to be a part of this. So I think that is an important factor for sure.
Yeah, and I think we see that a lot, sort of in popular media as well, where we're seeing very large companies who are going through many changes and challenges at the moment, as as many companies are reforming and changing, and we're seeing people leaving and exposés coming out about what it was like to work inside of those companies, and because their values, are becoming clearer. Personal values are becoming clearer, and brand values are becoming clearer. And sometimes we don't know what we signed up for when we come into a company. And you start to learn it when it goes through challenges. And in those moments, that's where it becomes really difficult to, mute yourself. And so we do see things like the Great Resignation happening. And then things being told that maybe people didn't want told, But
Yeah.
but I think, the question that starts to bubble up for me in that is like, maybe you recognize that you are not for that organization. Maybe you are seeing yourself, maybe because there is a values misalignment, or maybe just because you've decided that you want to go out on your own and do something that is your own work. How do you kind of brand yourself for you? Like, how do you move towards your own next evolution while you're already somewhere else? How do you manage that? And
Yeah.
that must be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It depends on if you are working inside an organization or if it's your own company. So I have a client right now who we're working on his personal brand. He has a very successful business, but he's also a speaker and an author and owns multiple other businesses that have nothing to do with the business, his core business. And people were always confused about what he does. And so he really wanted to work on creating a personal brand that's still aligned with the business. So, from a visual perspective, we're using similar color palettes and fonts and visuals so that it's not going to be jarring if somebody goes to either of his brands or goes to his LinkedIn, and even all of his language that we created, his positioning and tagline, and that aligns with who he is as the speaker and the author, but also as the CEO and founder of this business. So it was easy. Now it's easy for him to have this one almost, kind of his personal brand be ready to build on, so that he's ready maybe to exit that business, sell it, evolve away from it towards his personal brand. When it comes to an organization, if you suddenly start having like a website and logo and that, I think the company might be worried, right? Maybe that's not where you work on, but that's when it's really key to work on the foundation of that brand, so that you understand and you can start sharing things on social media, right? I think this is where social media will be essential, because you can't be driving traffic to a website or a blog or things like that, right? It would be much harder because, what will how will the company perceive that? So I think it's really working on your social presence and building your network, probably of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because inside corporate, you're going to meet a very different mindset of people than in the entrepreneur set. And I've spoken with a lot of people who leave corporate, and it is a challenge because they are used to the way that that's done and the container that they're inside and the mindset that comes with that. It's not necessarily bad, but it's different. And so it's starting to meet other entrepreneurs, starting to share things, starting to, see how you can start talking more about your thought leadership.
Yeah, I think that's really, really smart. I'm working with a client right now who's in a similar situation that you just described, where she has a business, It's her own business. It's very successful. It's grown over the years. And she's at a point where she's thinking about her next evolution. And we're, you know, she will eventually sell that business. And so we're working on her core message, right? Like, because as she's thinking about changing and moving, now we're like, all right, well, who are you? Who are you going to be? She's in the creative world. She'll continue to be in the creative world, but her message is going to change a lot, actually. And so, you know, we're working on that right now. She'll eventually start looking at things like her brand. But I think what you were just talking about as well is really essential, which is what are the communities that you're showing up in? And how are you showing up in those communities as you are in a place of transition? And you might not even be, saying it out loud that you're in a place of transition, because it might still be very private and confidential. But being in those communities might give you the safe space to start trying things out, to see, you know, it's one of the things that I think is so powerful about community is we get to try on different personas. And see how they fit. Does it feel right to me? What was a reaction of the people around me? Is it something that I really want to play with, you know, longer term? And so I think, branding and message start to really come together inside of these kind of containers of communities that we get to play with. I think that's a powerful idea. What's your thoughts on that in terms of going inside of communities and maybe playing with a brand?
Absolutely. I think that's, that's where you can also talk to people about how did you make that leap? Maybe you'll meet other entrepreneurs who were in more of a corporate setting before, and you can ask them those questions. I've spoken with a lot of people too who they're used to having all the things done. Like there's departments to do all the things. And then suddenly they're the copywriter, the admin person, the tech support, all of the things. And they're like, I don't know how to do it. So getting into a network like that means that you have a resource of people. So when you do want to launch, you've already met all the people that can help you set up all of the things that you need to do in your business. And I think, a lot of times, and both my husband and I are entrepreneurs. And for so many years, people are like, you guys are crazy. Like the instability, it's so volatile. Like people could not people were afraid for us. And it was so interesting to see that. None of our entrepreneur friends, but it was just so interesting to see that some people just couldn't handle the instability of our choices. So that's why just surrounding yourself with different people who have different perspectives is so important. I think in general, like I love having people in my life too that are in a corporate setting because I'm not in there. And so if I'm only ever around entrepreneurs, I don't also understand that experience. So I think it's having that diverse group of people that you can reach out to for help when you need it.
Mm-hmm. It brings up another question. And actually, before I jump in, I just want to see if anyone has any questions for myself or for Laura. As we've kind of gone around, we're traversing lots of territory here. So we're kind of ping-ponging around, and I don't want to leave anything sort of on the table. If you've got a burning question, feel free to ask it.
Yeah, would love any questions.
Not for me yet. I love the information, and I just realized my camera's on. I'm so sorry.
That's
Hello.
okay.
Hi, Gina.
How you doing? Good to see
Nice
you.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, and thank you for spending your day with us today. I think the information you're sharing is wonderful. Melissa, you hit it on the head. I have the same issues with social media as you do. When I shut down at the end of the day, it's kind of all I want to do on the computer. And my work now is revolving into social media. It's huge, brand yourself, get out there and network. And but yeah, so I appreciate all the information you're sharing. When it comes to the social media part, I always am hesitant. Not so much about, what I'm posting, how it's coming across. I guess starting small would work, like making little responses here and there, and then getting into the bigger posts. That's where I kind of have my issues. Like I'll start to type a response and I'm like, does anyone really want my response on this? Like, do they care? Are they going to sit and say,
you write
wow,
it and then you delete it and
yeah,
then yeah.
it's so bad. But yeah, so that's a big piece for me as well. So just listening to this, and I agree with the community thing. I think just sitting here listening to Melissa talk about it, I was like, yes, I'm there. I'm with you. Same thing.
You know, one of the
Amazing.
things that it's been an interesting thing to witness, just on that point, Gina, around, should I put the response in, or, does anyone really care? Should I, and really what you're saying is, should I use my voice? Right.
Right.
And it's been interesting to me watching so many diverse thought leaders over the last few years. I work with so many different people and I help them to really find that voice. And what's been interesting is watching people go from that place of, does my voice really matter, to, I actually don't care if somebody else thinks my voice matters. I think it does. And what I've witnessed is that it really comes with practice, because the first few times it is hard. It is hard to put that comment in, or to write that post, or to take an opinion. Like having an opinion in social media is terrifying the first time you do it. And then you realize that it actually doesn't matter. Like, it matters to you. And that's what matters. And you start to get better at it. And the next time you press the send key, it's a little easier. Next time it's easier. And then you don't even notice that you're hitting the send key. You're just doing it. And you start to hear yourself and your value. I remember when I was first starting out in this world, because as many of you know, this is an iteration of many careers that I've had. And one of the things that I, was being asked to do was to be on podcasts. And it was terrifying. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to say on a podcast? Do I have anything coherent to actually add to any conversation? And, the thing that happened for me was that, the first podcast is always the hardest because you don't know what to expect. But the reality is it's probably one of the safest places that you can use your voice. It's pre-recorded. The host wants you to succeed because they want the episode to be good. And they will work with you. And so you get to really explore. And what happened for me was, the more that I was on podcasts, and I've been on dozens now, is that you hear yourself and you're like, wow, that actually was coherent and that was smart. And wow, that's interesting. Oh, and I have an opinion I didn't know I had. And as you start to hear that and see that, all of those fears start to go away. Now, does it take away the fear of social media? No, because there is risk in social media, of course. But it makes you more discerning in terms of how you choose to share and what you choose to share, because you're hearing your own voice and you're hearing your voice echoed back to you. And I think for me, that was really powerful. And I've seen it in so many other people. Anything, Gina, anything there that you want to add, or Laura, or Melissa? Or
I definitely do. But yeah, Gina, do you have any thoughts there before I jump in?
No, I think a lot of it too is just having that confidence in yourself of, what you're talking about. You're okay to say it. And as long as you word it the right way, you hit the nail on the head. It's easy to speak behind a keyboard, but if you're confident in what your message is and you want to put it out there, just do it. And that's advice I have to take. So yeah, totally agree.
And it's having your opinion align with your values. So there's so many people that share their opinion online, and it's just like haters, and it's awful, right? But it's their opinion. It's wrapped up in this guise of that, and that is so toxic. So it's, I always say I want to share my opinion with kindness, and and so that kindness is a value of mine. And so to me, even if I write a very strong opinion piece, which I just posted one today, I do it from a place of love and kindness. And I think that's a distinction. and I love your Italia soccer ball. I'm currently living in Sicily, so I'm in the land of Italia right now.
I
Actually,
love
finally,
it.
after 8.5 months, got my permesso di soggiorno today. I got my resident permit card after living here for 8.5 months. And we're leaving a month and a half. So we're like,
Congratulations.
amazing. Yeah.
This is my focal point, that when we're in certain meetings that may be a little difficult or whatnot, a lot of times people stop me from talking and they'll be like, oh wow, you have this, you have that. So I try to put things in there that represent me, but also relate me to, I'm a relatable person, you know, yes, I'm HR,
yeah.
and yes, I'm doing something that is affecting you, but I'm just a person like you. So a lot of people touch on that. Thank you.
I
And
love
good
it.
for
I love
you.
it.
Enjoy it while you're there.
Thank you. My son plays football 3 days a week on a little Italian football team with he knows all the Italian soccer terminology now. So he knows pass and run and so like all of it. It's pretty cute.
Nice.
Anyway, that's a total side story. So I wanted to share about when I first started really sharing my opinion, because I was always the people pleaser. My opinion wasn't really a thing. I was always dimming my light and hiding all of that. So years ago, I wrote an opinion piece on the term mompreneur because I absolutely despise the term. But I was in a entrepreneur group that was called a mompreneur group. And so I was terrified to post this, but I was like, this has to be said. This is such BS. And I was very adamant about it. And so I wrote it. I did get a couple of people to read it through just to like, I was still kind of getting people to share, like, how does this come across? What is this? So I did do that. And sometimes I still will. And I posted it. And I was like, oh my God, what are they going to say? Because I'm like, so many of these people in this group are in my network. And didn't one of them share it inside the private Facebook group? And I was like, oh my God. And it was like, you've got to read this amazing post by Laura. Anyway, totally glowing. So many people commented on it. And wouldn't you know that the woman who had that event changed the name of it and took off the term mompreneur. And I was like, oh, the effective change. I was so proud of myself. It was like, just even thinking about that, I'm like, and if I hadn't shared my opinion and the people in my network who I was afraid they were going to just eat me alive, but they all agreed, but nobody said anything. And so me standing up and saying it made other people feel like, oh, I can actually say something now too. So me sharing my voice inspired others to share their voice. And that is magic.
And I think you just hit on something that is really important. And that is that, we talked about our brand values coming in, and you just displayed, sort of a couple, you said one of your brand values is kindness. And I would say that another brand value is something in the area of courage or bravery, or, so you have those, right? And by doing the action that you took of posting that, you're displaying that brand value. Now, you are an entrepreneur. And so if you had a brand value that was bravery or courage, and you were choosing to mute your voice, not only would you not be living to your values, but you would not be differentiating yourself. And that's part of what it is to have a brand, right? Our brands differentiate us. One of my brand values is sort of that concept of vibrancy and differentiation. I mean, and you all see me showing up with crazy colored hair and glasses. I mean, my hair is not my brand, but it is a representation of the brand that I have. That vibrancy comes in many other places as well, and it should come through in my writing. But these are the things that I think as brands, we have to think about. What are the values that we have, and how are we then displaying them through our personality, which is the external view of it, and through our actions, which are speaking, as we know, louder than any of the words that we're using. So, as you think about it, and I think we're coming up on time. It's probably the last question. As we think about those that our own personal brands, Laura, how would you help us to know how to differentiate ourselves, whether we're inside of an organization or external, and maybe we're entrepreneurs or solopreneurs? How would you, what advice would you give us to differentiate by using, whether it be brand values, brand personality, or maybe something else inside of that brand strategy?
Yeah, so one of our key parts of Brand Camp, which is what I take all of my clients through to help them build that foundation, is what makes you different. But we can't start there because we have to understand what are other people in your space doing, and who is your audience. And to me, it's looking at what you bring to the table. So maybe you have, Jeannie, you said you're in HR. Melissa, I'm not sure what you are in, or Shivani, but what, so you bring those things, your education, your knowledge, your years of experience, but what else is there that you bring? Are you like secretly a kung fu master? Are you a salsa dancer? Do maybe you have, like, what are those interesting life experiences that, or like, oh, I'm actually certified in this mindset something. Oh, well, you can pull that into the way you do your HR. There's so many different things that we all bring to the table. And I think it's looking at that. So for me, it was living abroad in my early 20s informed my design aesthetic, but also who I am as a person. So it's looking at, my travel and my design background and, all of these various things, and you layer them, your stories, and you figure out what is that thing that makes you different. And most of the time we can't see it for ourselves. Most of the time it's honestly staring people like right in the face. But it takes somebody, like that plane analogy I gave you, you need that 1,000-foot view so that you can actually, because the thing that makes us different is actually the thing is probably the easiest for us. And you're like, most of the time they're like, really? That makes me different? Doesn't everybody do that? Or isn't everybody like that? But they're not. But so it's usually the thing that's right there. And it's what you're so good at that you can't even see that that's the thing that makes you different from everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, we talk about that a lot in developing your message, right? It is the, when we get into the what, how, why, the how is the place where you differentiate, not the what. The what you do, thousands of people can do it, HR, and Melissa, I happen to know, is in artificial intelligence. So, she's sort of working in that technical side of the world. Shivani, I actually don't know your background, but these are things that lots of people are doing, but it's what makes you unique in that, in the development, in the delivery, in the process, in the way in which you come at that. And that it's the combination of who you are and how you do it that makes your message your message. And I think what I just heard you say is that the brand is doing the same thing, because it's picking up on that and it's looking at it and saying, well, now that who you are and how you do what you do, that's the thing that we're going to lean heavily into. We're going to, bring that to the fore and really make sure that people understand why you are different. And in that difference, how it helps others to understand not just what you do, but the thing that they've been trying to understand. I think it's such a powerful idea, because you just, you said that when you brought forward that, that mompreneur article opinion piece, by you saying it, other people got to say something. And I'll bet it's not so much that they were muting themselves as much as they didn't know how to say it, or didn't understand what was bothering them about it. Like sometimes we have that, like, I don't know, that mompreneur group, I don't know, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Something about it just bugs me. And when they read your piece, we're like, oh my God, I get it now. It's because of the name. Yeah. Right. And I think that's the thing that happens when we understand what we do and the unique piece that we bring to what we do. It helps others to understand things that they didn't even realize they didn't understand. But it's because in our stories, they hear bits and pieces of themselves. And in that, see themselves differently, they relate to themselves differently. And by doing that, they learn and they grow. And that's the power of message, and message delivered through a brand that is aligned to values, that uses personality, and that's differentiated because of who you are.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we got about 2 minutes left. I would love to hand it back to see if there are any other last questions, and also wanted to give Laura a chance to let everyone know how they can keep in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can check out our website, which is labcreative.ca. I can pop that into the chat. You can email me, laura@labcreative.ca. It's easy. And on LinkedIn, for sure, I would love to connect with you there. So let me find some links, and I'll pop those into the chat. Would love to stay in touch.
And also, Laura is one of our coaches at the Thought Leader Academy, and you will be doing a coaching session on personal branding. I think it's June 15th, isn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
15th. Trying to remember, even I think it might be at like 4 o'clock. I should have this queued up on my calendar. You think I would?
I don't think it's 4 o'clock because of the
Oh,
time zone.
11 a.m. Yeah. So it's 11 a.m. on June 15th for members of the Thought Leader Academy. Now, of course, if you know, as part of the Thought Leader Academy, we do weekly coaching. We do three sessions a week. So Laura's is just scheduled a few weeks out. We've got one coming up next week. I'm actually going to be facilitating that one next Thursday let me just look at the time. It is at 1 o'clock, and we're going to be talking about stepping into your thought leadership mindset. So we're going to be going a little bit deeper into the mindsets around change makers and experts, and looking at how do you move through some of those blocks, and how do you use your unique perspective. So we're going to go deep on that, and it is a coaching session. So lots of conversation. I'll do a little bit of upfront talking about it, but come with your questions, come with your problems, and we're gonna go deep on that. So I think that brings us right up to time. If anyone has a burning question, we can probably answer it. No?
Thanks so much for this. It was excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
and for the
appreciate your
great
time.
questions.
Yeah. Thanks for being so engaged. It's really fun.
Yeah,
Really glad
agreed. Thanks, ladies. Appreciate it.
Okay,
Have a
take
great
care.
weekend.